So hi everybody, good morning. Welcome to the panel on FemTech startups. My name is Asatani, and I'm very excited to be moderating this esteemed panel of panelists. I'm actually a founder of art startups in New York. My business doesn't really have anything to do with FemTech, but as a woman, obviously, I'm very interested in learning more about the advancements that are made in this field. Personally, I actually went through the process of freezing my eggs back in November, and I know how painful and how costly that was. So I'm very excited just to let you guys know that I'm very excited to be moderating this event. Before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of stats. Silicon Valley, Deloitte, McKinsey have all created a report recently that mentioned that the market is a little bit down. We saw a dip in the overall health investment by 27%. But the good news is that it didn't really affect the FemTech market. We have actually seen a 5% growth in the investments that are made in this field in the same time frame. So there's more advances made, more public money going in, more investment money going in this field. However, at the same time, Amina was just mentioning that only 2% of the research money is going to that field. So there are still some challenges that need to be tackled, and I'm hoping to learn more about it in this session. So just to kind of start off, I want to ask everybody here to give a quick intro about yourself and your company. So if you could start with Ida.
Sure. Hi everybody, thank you for coming. So my name is Ida Tin. I'm based in Berlin, Germany, though I'm from Denmark. I'm a founder. I founded a company called Clue, which is a period tracking app and more, many years ago. And as I was building this app, I was invited to be on a panel at a conference in San Francisco called TechCrunch Disrupt in 2016. And it was the first panel they ever had on female health. And I was looking to see what all the other panelists were building. And I could see that we were sort of neighbors, sisters. And I wanted to create a word that could sort of unite us and show that we were all building in the same industry. And that's why I coined the term FemTech, because back then, many people perceived what we were doing as niche, when of course building technology to address needs that half of the world's population have, it's not niche at all. But back then, it wasn't so obvious. So I wanted everybody to feel that we were part of this big global movement of changing how women could use technology to take care of their health and our well-being. And this is now 8 years ago, and now we can see that it really was the beginning of this big new sector in technology, now set to be a $1 trillion market by 2027, of course. So my journey since I was a founder at Clue is really sort of now being curious and thinking about the industry at large. I'm not at Clue anymore, but of course my heart is still there. I'm writing a book about FemTech and I'm curious about what's being built, and it's really fascinating and extraordinary to see what is being built in FemTech right now. Anything from deep technology, robotics, cancer screening in urine, molecule detection in menstrual blood, and many more really deep technology things, as well as a big cultural transformation that's happening globally. So it's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Gina?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you Sushi Tech Tokyo for having me. My name is Gina Bartasi, and I am the founder and executive chairman of Kindbody. Kindbody owns and operates 34, soon to be 37, fertility IVF clinics in the United States. We do have plans to expand globally, but as Ida mentioned, again, fertility and women's health was considered a niche industry a decade ago. I think even today, it's still considered niche, even though women make up 50% of the population. I think, too, to get a drug to market or a medical device market, they only recently started testing it on women. Previously, women were just small men, and we know they metabolize things differently and have different hormones. But as we think about some of the global trends, we know that men and women, or women and women and men, are waiting to get married and waiting to have children. And so the number one thing affecting the fertility industry's growth is as women stay in the workforce longer, they're having children longer. The first kind of iteration of Kindbody was as an egg freezing clinic. We wanted women to be proactive about preserving their fertility. There's this real disparity and imbalance in equality when men think about growing their career and creating financial wealth for themselves. Women do not have the same access. So what's happened over the last decade or two, women are going to college, they're going on to get graduate degrees, and they're waiting to get married. So the ramification of that is they're having fertility issues. So whether that's here in Japan or Germany or the United States, again, the fertility industry is growing rapidly due to all of these macroeconomic trends. And I think that will continue to grow. Kindbody has raised $315 million in both debt and equity, and we are pre-IPO. We have an extraordinary team, extraordinary group of clinicians, and so I'm honored to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Amina, and I'm a CEO and founder of a company called Fermata. We started about 5 years ago, just around the same time as you. So the fact that you have built a company of 3, that's amazing. I myself is trained in public health and health economics. So I'm coming from academia background. So I don't really have background in business when I started a company. But when I came across FemTech about 5-6 years ago, one of the challenges that I thought which was missing, or like in the industry, was someone who kind of understands how can we bring the products and services into the market. So my specialty when I was in academia was access to medicine. So I started to think about access to FemTech. How can we actually bring these products and services to the people who need it the most at the right timing? And so at Fermata, what we do is we don't necessarily have our own products, but we work with companies from abroad as well as Japanese companies to develop the product, to deliver the product to the people. And we also collaborate with a lot of companies in Japan who can actually do the access part. We also have built our own network and platform and ecosystems to bring in consumers as well as academics and researchers, medical professionals, politicians, and government officials to really develop the market in Japan based on our ecosystem that we have built. So I'm super excited to be here with you guys, and I'm willing to share what I've seen in Japan when it comes to FemTech industry and the development in the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So just to start off, the first question, I want to ask you, so how did you guys get started? And why did you decide to pursue this field, and what is the current driving force that moves you? Has it changed over the years as the FemTech industry developed, or are the challenges that you guys are working on remain the same? So let's start with
Ida probably should start that,
Ida,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, so my first spark to becoming an entrepreneur in FemTech was that I was sitting with this question: why has there been so little innovation in family planning methods? Because really not much has happened in 70 years since the pill came out. And I was sort of angry about it. I was like, what is this? Like, we put people on the moon, we have invented the internet, and a woman still doesn't know which day she can actually become pregnant. I was like, that's crazy. So I figured now we had, this was in 2008, the smartphone had just come out, the first iPhone. I was like, this is this really intimate place where if just the phone could tell me today you cannot get pregnant, or today I can get pregnant, that would be amazing. And so I decided I wanted to build a technology that could do that. I didn't know what was ahead of me, of course. But 10 years later, actually Clue did get FDA clearance to be the world's first 100% digital-driven type of birth control. So that was great. But then I think where I am now, to your question, like what's driving me now, I more and more see that female health is really this central piece for what I believe is needed for a healthy and sustainable planet. Like, I think we need to free women's energy up from not being well in their own bodies so that we can participate more in the world. because I think the world needs women to participate more. We need more diversity because clearly what we've been doing for many years doesn't work so well for our planet. So we need something different. And to me, I'm really curious about how this intersection between female health, technology, and planetary health, how they actually fit together. And clearly they do, and there's a big, big economic win to be had if we invest into women's health. So that's what's driving me, this curiosity of how does getting women freed up to participate more become an important part of our future.
Yeah, I started Kindbody in 2018, and we opened our first IVF and fertility clinic in 2019, so it's been a really fast pace of growth. I'm a serial entrepreneur. My prior company was Progeny, which is the only publicly held fertility company in the United States. And the reason I started Kindbody was similar to Ida, that we're by women for women. We say we're by patients for patients. When I went through the fertility experience, everything, there were white walls, white men, white coats, and white medical degrees, and the environment and the entire process was not very digitally forward, and it was not very kind or empathetic. We call Kindbody intentionally Kindbody because we want you to be kind to your body. And going through family building is not just this unique family building journey of 2 weeks where you go through stimulation, you have an egg retrieval, and then if you're planning a family, you have an embryo transfer. A lot of women now, again, are proactively freezing their eggs, so they don't go through a transfer, maybe if ever, or certainly later in life. But we know today that it's about women's health, and you have to think about recurrent miscarriage, recurrent pregnancy loss and miscarriage. You have to think about nutrition and wellness. There are a number of reasons that you can't get pregnant. One of the reasons is we don't do a good job in any country educating women about when they can conceive and not. And so there are lots of women, and men too, who walk around thinking I can get pregnant any day of the week, any day of the 30-day month. And that's just not true. Right. And so I think we have to do a better job of educating both men and women about proactive ways to learn about fem health, whether that's digitally, well, it's only digitally, is what I would advocate that education looks like in the future.
Right.
But,
yeah, you just mentioned about the medical professionals being dominated by men, and also that could be said about the investors as well as the decision makers in the political world as well, especially in the US with what's happening right now. But Amina, I want to ask you, so you mentioned backstage about how in Japan, when you started the business, the word FemTech, people in the VC world didn't really understand what that even was, and they just assumed that it was a FinTech instead of FemTech. Yeah. But since you've founded the company, has that VC scene kind of changed over the years? I also want to ask you about the political aspect as well, because you mentioned that in Japan, unlike in the US, the healthcare system is very much connected to the public system, public health system. So what do you think on the VC world and then the political side of that?
Yeah, so when I first started it, that was 2000, when I first came across FemTech was 2017 or so, and I was in VC then. After my academia professional, I just kind of moved to VC, and then I started to see a few FemTech products developing, coming up from the West. And the first sort of shock that I had was I was sitting at the DD meeting with, I was the only female there, and there was one company from the US that came out, the FemTech company, and that was modern fertility, which basically like you can take like a blood sample and then you can measure your AMH level at home. And I was like 28 by then, so, at the time. So I was like, whoa, this is a fascinating product. I want to have that. I have a customer here in Japan, and no one in the room got interested. No one. And I just had to ask myself why it just didn't go through. And then I started to think about like sort of creating fermata then. So in the beginning, right, in 2017-18, no one knew about the term FemTech. When I organize an event, a lot of male investors come and they think that it was a FinTech event. And then then I started talking about FemTech, and they were like, "Whoa, this is like a really uncomfortable conversation that I don't want to be here." But that trend has changed, in the last 5 years or so. 2-3 years in, FemTech term has become relatively well known in Japan. So even the VCs, they started to get interested. So they're like, "Oh, it's a new trend that's happening in the West. Thanks to you guys." That they got interested and wanted to learn more. What's happening in Japan now, 5 years in, there's a lot of FemTech products are happening being developed outside of Japan, but there are not so many has arrived in Japan yet. So the access is a big challenge. And what's available in Japan is period underwear, menstrual cups, femcare products, not so tech. But the term itself became so popular here that the VC kind of assumed what FemTech is just femcare products and not so much tech. And when FemTech founders in Japan, when we try to fundraise now in Japan, they kind of assume that it's not going to reach a huge market. So it's becoming rather more difficult to fundraise now. So we're having sort of reverse effect here. On the other side, the political world, what I first did when I started the company is to work with the mainstream the government politicians to insert FemTech, the term FemTech, into the national budgeting document. We call it honebuto in Japanese. So that happened in 2021, and things changed rapidly since then. Ministry of Economy, METI, Ministry of Health, even Tokyo Metropolitan Government can now use the government funding or public funding to support FemTech founders as well as FemTech services. So I do see like a rapid growth in Japan, but the problem is we don't really yet have actual services and products. So once, I think in the next 2 years, we'll probably start to see a lot of tech products arriving in Japan. Mm-hmm. We even changed a few regulations, pharmaceutical fair law regulation in Japan, so that a more IoT product can be registered in Japan by PMDA. So we'll probably see a lot more change in the next couple of years, but so far, I do see a gap between what's potential market out there and what's here and what the VC is seeing as a potential and the government's movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Gina, I want to ask you so obviously Kindbody is a unicorn company and has raised over 350 million, but just hearing what Amina mentioned about what's happening in Japan market, do you see a positive changes in the US market, especially in the VC industry world?
Yeah, we do. I've been raising money in the FemTech space since Ida coined the term a decade ago. When I was raising money for Progeny, which again is a now multi-billion-dollar public company, 7 or 8 years ago, investors would say, yeah, but can this get big enough? VCs don't want to back something that can't be multiple billions of dollars. And so they were wildly skeptical that the FemTech market could get multiple billions of dollars. Today, that's really reversed, particularly in the West. Instead of me having to proactively reach out to investors to tell them FemTech is going to be big, they call on us and they're like, hey, wait a minute, this is going to be really, really big. So I do think now that's a new phenomenon. I think only in the last 2 to 3 years what's happened in the family building and fertility space in particular is a bunch of institutional money has come in and consolidated fertility practices. So a lot of private equity firms, KKR, Ares, they all have rolled up these fertility programs. So once VCs start to see scale and hundreds of millions of dollars in any vertical, they will start investing, but it takes a little bit of time. They're going to probably need to see a couple of other companies go public and have a liquidity event, and then that's what allows the VCs to repurpose their money. And then I think the only thing I would add is investors say, because the fertility industry is growing double digits, it's hard to find an industry that's just growing organically about 11.5% to 12% every single year. And so investors say, well, what could slow down this very torrid growth? And I'm like, I don't know. If people went back to marrying their high school sweetheart and having their first child at the age of 22, then maybe fertility slows down. But I don't know if that's anything you're interested in, or any of us are interested in, is going kind of backwards to where women are not career oriented. So we think there's a tremendous amount of growth, and we're in the very, very early stages of FemTech, and VCs recognizing it is a place to put invested capital and make a really attractive return.
Great. Thank you. Ida, I want to ask, so yes, we are seeing more investments made in the FemTech and women's health sector, and there are political and regulational changes being made, but also I think at the same time, there are some things that need to be changed on the education, how we kind of conceive or perceive the FemTech industry on both men and women's side. Do you have any insights on that?
Sometimes I think that there is like mainstream culture, and then there are things that are outside mainstream culture, which I think of a little bit like the shadow areas of culture, where all the things that are a little bit difficult to talk about lives. And for many years, periods, for instance, were in this shadow area of culture. And then as we started talking about it, so much that the New York Times called 2016 or 15 the year the period went public. But once we were able to talk about periods, then suddenly we can also start talking about menopause and all the other things that needs to be talked about. And I think that if you look at this sort of the area where in culture it just became visible, something just became visible, that's where technology comes in. So we start innovating in this space where suddenly we have more room in culture. And of course, education is a really important part of like expanding this culture. If we know more about our bodies, when we know which days we can actually get pregnant, if we understand that FemTech is not only a period cup, even though they're great, but we need more than that. Then we start being more open to understanding that we can innovate, because then suddenly we realize like, oh, women have all these issues that nobody's taking care of. It's like all these things that are frustrating or difficult or too painful. And then if we also have great examples of women doing stuff, then the women who experience these things, they're like, hold on, I need more space in the world for my experiences. And then we see people starting companies, and that's exactly what's happening right now in FemTech, where many women are tired of waiting for something to be built, and they do it themselves. And I think what you mentioned, is really important, that we see this whole, from the first people, the whole series of like the growth journeys of startups. So the first people having the idea all the way to IPOs, because we need to see that there is financial return at the end, so that we have willingness to invest at the bottom. So I go do the IPO, we need it, we need the examples, amazing stories of people showing that there is financial potential, because that's part of creating the space and culture. And then it becomes this bigger, change cycle that we really desperately need.
Right. And you also kind of touched upon backstage that, yes, like the FemTech is to do with the woman's body, and we need women on the decision-making side, and we need more women to be involved. But at the same time, we need men to be involved as well. And can you talk about the importance of having a mixed team?
Yeah, I know that people say built by women for women, but I actually like to say built by diverse teams for the world, because I truly believe that all of society benefits when we invest into women's health. And we need many men to be part of our startup journeys. We need them as co-founders, as investors. We need them as regulators, the politicians. We need them as journalists, and also just people cheering us on, and team members. Like we need men to participate in this cultural expansion as well. So yes, we need the men in FemTech. Everybody, come.
Great, thank you. So Amina, I want to ask you, so in Japan, well, it's not as diverse as in the US or in Europe. When you're running a business in this field, is there any part of like diversity that you kind of try to like incorporate as you like build your team, or when you're building advisory board, or when you're gathering information for your company?
Well, it's a challenge, right? Like when we try to hire people, it's really difficult to get men to apply. And we now have about think about 6 or 7 members, male members, but in the beginning it was only a female group. But what I see the difference compared to what's happening in the West when it comes to startup sort of market is that when we have a FemTech sort of startup event in Japan, I would say 99% is men, right? A couple of days ago we had a reception, sushi tech speaker reception. We had a lot of overseas guests, right? At the reception it was about 50-50. So that kind of shows the global diversity in startup field and the Japanese startup field diversity. Now, when we tried to sort of, when I started a company, it was quite interesting that whenever I go fundraising, whenever I go to banks to speak, they try, the VCs and bankers, they try to bring the female capitalists or female bankers. And I was like, I can talk to men, it's okay. But it was still difficult. And then there's one bank that even tried to change, there's a male, the man banker was in charge of us. They tried to change to a female, and I kind of had to stop that. I was like, no, I like him. I want him to be our contact person. So I guess there's a bit of a diversity challenge within the VC and the FemTech world. I see some of the accelerator happening in the West. I mean, in Europe, a few FemTech focus, and I see that about, the very much mixed gender accelerator. Whereas when we tried to sort of do something FemTech in Japan, I was, again, 99% women. So I think we do need to sort of break the bridge or the mindset of when we try to build a business, whether it fits in a women's health field, building the business can be a mixed group, is a business and doesn't have to be focused and built only by women.
Actually,
right?
if I can add to
yeah,
that,
of course.
One of the reasons why I wanted to come up with this word FemTech was because I felt that it would be easier for the male investors, because it was all male investors, to say, yeah, I have invested into this FemTech company, as opposed to saying, I just invested into this pelvic floor training company or something that felt like a little bit awkward. And also I noticed that when I was pitching to the VCs, which I've done more than I liked a lot, I would hear myself talking in ways that were kind of trying to build this bridge over to the men's work. I would talk about, the KPIs, the data, the science work. I actually never used the word menstruation, like ever. I think I just unconsciously tried to let's talk about what we can share. Because I know that you have never had a period. It's, how are you going to relate? But there are so many aspects of building this business where you can relate. So I think this constant effort to building bridges must go 2 ways. We must invite the men in, and they must be brave, courageous to say, okay, what is this? But what I have found is that many men, they do want to understand what's happening in women's life. Like, what is this thing? And now it's also a huge economic possibility, and it's going to help our planet. So what's not to like?
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And I'm glad to see a lot more men in the audience today as well. Gina, so you mentioned that you're expanding beyond the US market. When you do, is there any kind of considerations that you do when you're expanding beyond the US market, like cultural wise, any systematic ways that you kind of differentiate how you operate in the US and in other countries?
Yeah, there will be. We're not expanding internationally yet. It's on the roadmap, but it's probably 3 to 5 years from now. And what's driving that, again, is the patient population that's waiting to get married, waiting to have children is not just United States. Women in Japan and women all over Asia and Europe and other developing and developed countries are going through this phenomenon and again, need fertility support, both women and men. People presume that fertility issues are female related, and it's important. Many men know today, but half of all fertility issues are male related. They're related to men's sperm more than anything else. So, but in any event, when we talk to our patients come from 3 areas. We have D2C, so we have consumers. We have insurance companies that represent about 40% of our audience, our patient population, but then we also sell into large self-insured employers. So employers buy and add fertility benefits. I don't know how much that happens in Asia today, but it's coming if it's not here yet. It was not that relevant in Europe, but it will be, and it is now. They're starting to see similar things in Europe that they're seeing in the US, where employers are adding fertility coverage. Many of our employers today have global employees, and so they're really directing us in that new market development. In that new market development, they've said Canada, specifically Toronto first, Toronto, London, Dublin, Singapore, will be the first 4 markets. And when you look at Europe and you say, okay, what does your international roadmap look like and why? In Germany, pre-implantation genetic testing is illegal. And that's one of the reasons we have really high success rates in the US, is 50% of all embryos are genetically abnormal. That's one of the contributors, it's the leading contributor to high miscarriage rates, is because the human body is actually not that good at reproduction. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage. Again, women and men don't talk about miscarriage, but it happens 25% of the time, and it's because of chromosomal abnormality in the embryo. You can test it today, it's called PGT, but it's illegal in Germany. So, and then there's still some illegal regulatory environment around same-sex couples, around egg freezing, and so we have to navigate all of that. So we'll go to the most fertility-friendly countries first, and those continue to change. Canada was actually not on the roadmap 7 or 8 years ago. London was the first international city, but as employers really think about their own expansion efforts, it's much easier in the US to expand to Canada than it is across the pond.
Interesting. I didn't even know those data at all. That's very interesting. Yeah, Japan, Tokyo Metropolitan Government just launched, they decided to subsidize some of the cost for freezing the eggs, I think in October, and it applies for people that are living in Tokyo, but I'm hoping that they act as a leading city to kind of, get all the other states.
The United States and Japan both have declining birth rates.
Exactly.
They have declining birth rates. So you can't sustain Social Security and similar efforts that are government sponsored in any country if you don't have the tax base from a growing population. And so when your population is declining, you have to think about efforts to rebuild that population, and certainly providing women the opportunity to freeze their eggs so they can have children later is a great way to do that. So we applaud the Japanese government for doing that. Mm-hmm. And right, they need to do it in other cities other than just Tokyo.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I think before actually going through the process, I was a little bit embarrassed to talk about it, but really I felt very empowered actually to have done the egg freezing process, because it gives me an option. I don't have to give birth tomorrow. I have more time, I have more options, it gives me more decision-making power. So I hope that this information is shared more widely among the women and men, and that they're discussed more freely between them. I also want to ask you guys, when I mentioned that I'm going to be moderating this FemTech session, very few people ask me, oh, why are you having a woman-specific panel? Why not just, human health tech panel? So I just want to ask, what is the importance, the significance of having FemTech panel, or a FemTech-specific industry, and the discussion around it? Amina, do you want to start?
Well, some of the things that I started to think recently is every time I go and speak to big companies, there is now a trend in Japan to focus on D&I, diversity and diversity and inclusion. They have a lot of panel discussion about how are we going to include, focus on gender equality and then other diversity issues, but they don't necessarily talk about what they should focus on. I mean, empowering women, that's great, but what do we have to do? What are the solutions to make that happen? And that big piece is missing. So I think to have a women's health focused panel, or to distribute information around this industry is happening, is a thing among business community, is to give them it's one way of giving them a solution, an answer to how can we achieve diversity and inclusion within the firm. But obviously, as you said, there was no other. The funding in women's health is lacking in research as well as in startups. So we need to have a space to raise our voice that this is a big industry that's happening here. People need to recognize it, and then together build the industry. So it's supposed to be a part of health tech, right? And then if we could do that, that's great. But that's, I think, that's in the future. That's where we're trying to go towards. But for now, because not many people recognize yet that this industry do exist, that we need to have its own space to be able to discuss about these things.
Gina?
Yeah, I think we have to be intentional and deliberate about diversity. For decades, there were too few females on any panel, so we shouldn't apologize in FemTech to have an all-female panel. It makes total sense to me. I think it's important to understand when I first started raising money and being an institutionally backed entrepreneur, which is very different than a bootstrapped entrepreneur, I didn't know a lot about the funding or the VC ecosystem. So there's actually plenty of female entrepreneurs. The challenge is there weren't plenty of female check writers. In the VC and private equity world, there were very few women at large funds that could write meaningful checks, a $10 million, $50 million, $100 million check. And so the VCs and the private equity firms have done a better job of having female representation at their funds, but it's still too few and far between. And so we have to be, again, deliberate about supporting other women. I appreciated your story that you said, wait, I want the male banker. I think we all have to be able to do that, reach across the aisle, and it is about gender equality and men and women taking great pride in female tech. I actually had the opposite happen to me. A large bank in Manhattan brought in an exclusively male banking team. And they said, how do we earn your business? And I said, you got to bring some women. And so I'm very intentional about grooming and pulling up other women. And I do think there are more and more men today also offering to do that. But it's not going to happen by accident. You have to be deliberate to ensure that you have both gender and race diversity, right? It's not just gender. You have to be diverse in more ways. And it's not just race and gender, it's sexual orientation. There's a number of things that you have to think about when you think about creating more parity in all of society.
Yeah, +1 on that. I will just be very blunt and say the tech sector had completely overlooked, failed, underinvested, under-innovated into female health. There was just big open space where there was just a acute lack of awareness that you could even conceive of ideas to build, around women's health. It just wasn't happening. So I think that's like, so it's like, oh, can we put the spotlight over here and say it's a thing? So I think bringing attention is one reason why we need to call it something. And then I will also say there's still a huge lack of data on women's lives, on women's bodies, all the way from cellular to how we act and behave in the world. So the fact is that there is something lacking in the world. There's lack of attention, there's lack of money, there's lack of innovation. And so we have to call that out and be like, no, it's not that we lack, health innovation. We lack this kind of health innovation for me and us. So I think that's one of the reasons why we still need to call it something, because there's a something missing.
Thank you. So this is going to be the last question. So what is your vision for the next phase of your company or for FemTech industry? And what is your hope for the future of FemTech industry as a whole? Amina, do you want to start?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be done, but we're currently, as I mentioned, Japan is going to the next phase of actually being able to bring in tech products, IoT, tech, FemTech products and services within Japan, but also from outside of Japan. Regulation has been updated. We have a few medical products now being registered as FemTech product as registered as a medical device by PMDA. So in the next couple of years, we'll probably see a growing number of products be in the market. So as fermata, we want to support these companies, but also bring these companies in and access them to the big companies in Japan as company benefits with the medical professionals so that they can deliver this product through their clinics, through their, to their patients. Government officials so that they can actually deliver this product through their government fundings to the people who live it, to the public. So that actual access to FemTech phase, we're in there. We actually done in the past 5 years the awareness part, so I think we're pretty good with that now. So the next is more an exciting phase of bringing these products and services to the people. So that's pretty a lot of challenges still.
A lot of challenges, but very exciting. Gina?
Yeah, I think what we're working on is for women and men to be more proactive than reactive. I think in the women's health and femtech industry, you waited to be diagnosed as infertile before you proceeded with treatment, and whether it's your example or a modern fertility test at home to measure your FSH, women for the first time ever are being proactive instead of this very reactive nature. So we'll hope that we see, again, Japan expand their egg freezing benefit to other cities. We'd love to see it in other countries. But I think you're going to see more and more as you look towards the future, women taking control of their reproductive health. And to Ida's point, really their entire health. Cardiovascular health, cardio disease is the #1 killer of women, and women don't talk about it. Menopause is a hot subject right now, no pun intended. But anyway, we're finally bringing to light that women and men are actually different human beings and built differently and think differently. So I think we're going to see more of the same. Again, I said it earlier, but we're in the very early innings of femtech and women's health.
I would love the world to collect more data on women, and I'd like us to use all the data that we are collecting. I think for users of technology, our data is still very scattered, and it's really hard to build this holistic picture that can make us more proactive and do preventive care. And I'd love us to really be mindful when we start using the AIs, which we already are, that we are not building on these really flawed and biased data sets that the world has produced so far. So I think that's a really big theme, like getting more data, getting high quality, diverse data, and making it actually matter for users. And then I will say, to your point, I mean, distribution, discovery, still huge issues across the globe, but even like getting from, this startup built this amazing thing, it's like a magic box, and do something amazing, but where am I going to buy it? Is my healthcare provider going to prescribe it? Oh, not really yet. Is somebody going to pay for it? Well, no. So, like, it's still a young industry. We need maturity. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So that kind of concludes our session. But I just want to say the investments addressing women's health could add years to life, and the growth, this could potentially boost the global economy. So it is very important that we had a talk today. I'm very thankful that you guys are here today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sushi Tech.